All right, we got a pretty interesting topic today. How do you feel about clones or inspired buys bringing back discontinued fragrances, whether that's niche or designer? I've got a couple for you today, and I just want to discuss the topic in general and see where everybody lies on this topic, as it is kind of an interesting concept, if you will. I don't think this necessarily happens in every market, at least the way it does in fragrance. Fragrance can be more complicated regarding compliance, ingredients being outright banned, and it also gets more complicated because different regulations for different countries, different parts of the world also has to be taken into account because they want to sell in many markets globally. So there's just so many things to take into account. Discontinuation could be for artificial scarcity, artificial hype for the brand. That might be the case with the two I have today. But also, I assume it's IFRA compliance. There's always reformulation, but maybe the fragrance is too dissimilar after the formulation to where they just scrap it. They just don't deem it worthy to release. It could be diminishing the brand if they're trying to return the fragrance after reformulation and it's not hitting the mark. Since there are a lot of us in the community who would likely be pretty critical of that, right? If it's not really bringing back that identity that everyone knew and loved. Anyway, quick tangent. But today, first I have Arsh Extrait. People tie this to Guerlain, L'Homme Idéal, Cologne, and the Platine Blanc. I think the Platine Blanc was a even more exclusive release. So that's the first one we have. Really solid fragrance. I'll dive into that. And then we do have Armaf's Infinity Silver, which is YSL L'Homme's Ultime, I believe. Yeah, I heard really good things about that, but yeah, that came out a while back and was a pretty quick release. So we've got Armaf's version. So really, I'm going to be going off the fragrance community, a lot of the past reviewers that have been here a long time and what they say, just because they've been around for so long, they likely know what they're talking about. In many cases, they have a good nose. They've done this for a long time. But yeah, people really do say Arsh Extrait comes with the territory of being in that Guerlain Platine Blanc family and doing it, quite accurately. I really do find this DNA very interesting because I'm such a fan of Guerlain, and their L'Homme DNA, is so interesting. It's like it's built around this almond base, right? And it's cool to see it done in a fresh approach, with more of a green almond, as they say the accord is, and building it up from there. Just sweetness, freshness, very uplifting for sure in regard to this fragrance. The uplifting nature kind of reminds me of L'Iseey's Pour Homme, the original one that came out, quite a while ago. I'm only referencing it in the feeling, but the note breakdown, just the scent you get is totally different for sure. Yeah, really solid pickup. It's interesting they also picked an extrait. I don't know, I feel somewhat indifferent about extraits in general because especially with something that's fresher, I think people would likely want it to project a little more and perhaps give and take a little bit of longevity. Not that it always happens, obviously it's way more complex than that, but with an extrait, at least on my skin, many times, more than half the time, I would say, the fragrance is always sitting closer to my body. And therefore, you get more of the longevity. But I would say for a freshie, sometimes that's not exactly what you're going for. So, it really does seem like extrait is just used so commonly now as a marketing tactic. But ultimately, it is a fine line of serving the final product and its performance and it's what it's giving you versus, how the market is portraying the fragrance. Everyone who's not super into fragrance, I think generally, they might not even know what an extrait is or really even care to bother to know, but I think the assumption would just be greater performance, greater push off from the body, just across the line, all positives. But I think that's a big misconception that lies around fragrances in general. We can talk about that more in another video too. I believe it was, hovering around the $50 mark or so. So 37 seemed pretty justifiable. And, that's another thing too, versus going on eBay, Mercari maybe, secondhand markets where the price inflation is going to be crazy. I'll put a screenshot on screen of the current prices. I didn't even look before this video, but I think we pretty well all know that's a common occurrence, whether it's people scalping on purpose or people who just by chance have that fragrance in their collection and they're like, oh my gosh, I could really make a come up on this sale if it, works out. So that's another dilemma as well, right? Is how much do you really want the original discontinued formulation if you can get your hands on it versus getting Arsh Extrait for 37 before tax. I'm not necessarily on the fence one way or another, but I just like to outreach to you guys in the community and see what you feel. But I am thankful that I was able to try some of these fragrances at such a lower price point. Just because for me, really, it's more about enjoying the journey, putting my nose on more things, improving how I detect fragrance, and a lot of the nuance that's involved in this community. So I think really just from that standpoint, it's just giving me more opportunity versus me looking at it as a price to the liquid, price to ml per se. It's just more about the experience. I think that's really important to consider in a lot of purchase decisions. All right, funnily enough, Armaf Infinity Silver is also very office friendly. Yeah, really solid freshie. It's interesting. I'm sure this is lower in oil concentration, but it really does push off way more than the Arsh X-Straight. For a freshie, this thing is insane in terms of all the performance attributes you could want. Like, it's almost a little overkill. I think you could, in an office, considering it's so office appropriate, I think you do need to be careful on the trigger if that's where you're going to be wearing it. That said, the fragrance DNA is so much different than Arsh X-Straight or Platine Blanc, so you can't really compare them just based off of oil. I'm likely assuming there's so much more ambroxan and just like very long living materials, at least in the dosage that is put in there, for sure to be pushing off for that long. It's pretty crazy. There's a lot of fragrances out there that people would refer to as like a dumb reach fragrance. You could put those in that category, but I think they have a little more intent than that as well. I think they're taking a signature DNA within the family line, doing really different things to that well-renowned DNA. And I think that's really fun. I do understand why, from a branding perspective, why that's a thing, keeping a signature captive or signature accords still there. But I really do like when they kind of go out the box even further, push it that one step further. And then you end up with a result like this. Very, very impressed, very impressed. One other thing I did want to actually bring up as well is, maybe an alternative to something discontinued that's still, designer, but also not inflated like crazy because it's not discontinued. And that's when I talked about Le Ducy pour Homme earlier from Iseey and Miyake. I think something like this is just perfect for many, many collections. I have heard of people saying maybe it's a little too floral. It just doesn't work well for them, but it does work very well for many people. It's iconic in its own right. This has been around for a long time. We've got Jacques Cavalier, who has done stuff for pretty much almost all of the LV fragrances in their newest collections. This was like one of the original fragrances that he worked on in his very early career. So you could try to tie back to this fragrance if you have LVs, see if there's any comparisons, see how he's grown as a perfumer, see how he has become a legend within the fragrance perfumery world. A lot of history, a lot of interesting facets there. But again, it just comes down to you're getting all of that for like $25 to $30, and it's a huge bottle. I decanted some of it to my dad, but you can see a lot of it is gone. So I don't know. This is a very monumental fragrance to me. There's other fragrances out there too, for sure. This is just a good example. This is the example I would say that I have in my collection. That's another alternative if that's what you want to get into. You maybe aren't a fan of clones inspired by companies, but you're also not gonna want to pay the $200 to $300 plus. These are all uplifting. It's kind of funny. I don't know why these are all the ones I have that are like in that realm of uplifting designer with a very remarkable accord that sticks out from maybe like your Bleu de Chanel or Sauvage or that realm of things. All right, this video was interesting. I think I went off more on a tangent for sure. Definitely more discussion based while talking about some of the aspects of both fragrance. It's just more fun to discuss this as a whole concept, and I'm really intrigued what people in the comments will say, what your viewpoint is on it. There's just so many angles we could take on this topic, so I tried to kind of dissect different angles and just get the conversation going, essentially. Let me know if you like these videos or if you'd like me to be a little more structured. I don't per se go off a script, but I kind of do bullet points and go in that chronological order and just keep it a little more structured. Let me know if you like those, or honestly, if you like both. I'm not a person that is the same every day. I feel like without intention, I kind of changed the way I live day by day. So I think that's kind of fun. Reflecting on that through fragrance content is pretty awesome. And yeah, I'm just curious how you all like to interact with me. And yeah, I appreciate all your feedback. I appreciate you being here. And I think I'm just gonna keep rolling with it. I couldn't be more excited at this point in time when it comes to fragrance. So I'll see you guys in another one. So far, so good.